Hi there, I'm Jack Tyler, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Boston Sax, the show where you take your questions about saxophones and really anything else and actually answer them. On today's episode, we'll be discussing the moral ramifications of terraforming Mars and is becoming a colonist right for you. Hey Jack, where should I put my ligature on my mouthpiece? So this is actually a little bit embarrassing to admit, but until I started making my own mouthpieces like 5 years ago or so, I didn't realize that the line that is right behind the bridge on the top of your mouthpiece, that's actually called the ligature line. That's where your ligature is technically supposed to be, and almost every manufacturer has this on the mouthpiece. So interestingly enough, the position of the ligature on the mouthpiece can change how the reed responds. If you move the ligature up really far towards the top of that ridge and clamp it down, you're basically shortening the facing curve, which is going to make it play with a little bit more resistance, which may be something that you want if the mouthpiece is really bright or the reed is too soft. Now, if you push the ligature all the way back to the end of the body of the mouthpiece, which most famously you see Dexter Gordon do this when he's playing a vintage Link, what that does is actually give you a little bit more of a fulcrum and opens up the reed, making it a longer facing curve, which can free things up and give you a little bit of a quicker response. So mess with this the next time you have a minute, changing the position of your ligature, and see if it makes an effect for how you play. Hey Jack, how do I achieve a brighter tone? I've tried a bunch of different mouthpieces and reeds and just can't seem to get the sound that I have in my head. Well, the easiest way to do that is just buy the shiniest mouthpiece you possibly can. All jokes aside, it sounds like you've already done the obvious. You've checked out some mouthpieces that have a higher baffle and overall less internal volume. Because remember, when you decrease the internal volume, you're speeding up your air, which in a very general sense is going to brighten and center your tone. So if you've already done that and not gotten what you want, I would first start by trying some softer reeds. This can also help bring out the upper overtones, but what I'm guessing might be the root of the issue here is how you're approaching the horn in terms of your tongue position. So if you start trying to play with more of an E sound and raising up your tongue position while you're playing, that's going to act as an internal baffle in your oral cavity to again speed up the air and get things to sound more centered. Last but not least, you really have to pay attention to how you're supporting your air. A lot of saxophone players make the mistake of breathing shallowly from their lungs as opposed to sitting on their diaphragm, which allows you to focus your air, achieve a much higher level of volume, and in turn, you can center things and make them brighter just by changing how you put air into the instrument. Hey Boston Sax, are you ever planning on making a classical cut of your saxophone reeds? So the short answer is yes, that is in the cards. However, I am a terrible classical saxophone player. I was actually so shit at classical saxophone that my professor in college just had me reface mouthpieces and gave me the credit anyway so I could graduate. So when we do make a classical reed, I'm going to need your help. We're gonna need a lot of beta testers, but it's something that I've been thinking about over the last year as we continue to grow the brand. Dear Jack, how do I know when it's time to change the pads on my saxophone? So this question kind of reminds me of the fact that, like, if you think that you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. If you have any, inclination that you think your pads need to be changed, it's probably a good idea to have them checked right away. It's one of the most important things that keeps your horn playing great is making sure that all the pads are sealing. And what happens with pads that are made out of leather, which is 99% of pads out there, is that as time goes on and they're going through that wet-dry cycle of basically being hit with your saliva and then drying out in the case, is the leather tends to get harder, it tends to shrink, which makes it a lot more difficult to adjust when it's not touching the sides of the key cups. And then what will eventually happen is they will rip and you'll just start to have leaks because the tone hole will be sealing against a piece of felt instead of a nice piece of leather. So the first thing to do is just check first off the fitment of the pad in the key cup. If you're seeing that the pads are not touching the sides of the key, that's going to make it, again, very difficult to keep in regulation and adjust, and could be a sign that the pad has aged and shrunk a little bit. You'll also be able to just feel the leather. When it gets really papery or the opposite, really hard and crusty, again, it's going to be really difficult for a tech to make that seal again, so you want to get that changed right away. Now, there's a couple things that you can do to prolong the life of your saxophone pads, and that would be cleaning them every once in a while. I like to use Lemon Pledge because it has a little bit of oil in there to revitalize the leather, but again, once you get to the point where the pads are crusty and can't be adjusted anymore, it's really a good idea to get them changed. One other thing to note is that over time the leather also will tend to get more porous, so even if it looks like it's sealing without inspecting it very closely with a leak light, old pads can leak just through the leather themselves. Lastly, a trick that you can do to test, especially if you're trying a horn at a shop or, looking at something on Craigslist like that, and you want to make sure that you're not going to have to change the pads, is just take a Q-tip and put a little bit of saliva or water on the pad, and if it instantly darkens, that's a really good sign that the leather has dried out, it's aged to the point where it has no more moisture in it, no more suppleness, and it's not going to be easily adjusted, and you're probably going to have to change it. Hey Jack, when are you finally going to release those damn saxophone cases? Yes, you've got me. It's been such an insanely difficult journey to get the Boston Sax Shop cases released. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a couple years ago, I released a case called the Ambassador case, which was my absolute perfect design of a saxophone case, super small, lightweight, really easy to get in an overhead, but still very protective, had all the features that I've always wanted. The problem though, and this is something I've just come up against time and time again having a small business, is making really high quality products in really small quantities and being able to do that consistently and also at a price point that's going to be accessible for everyone out there. It's basically like the most difficult thing to do as a small business. And in this particular case, I was running into quality issues with the manufacturer. So we started over about a year ago as to the filming and release of this video. And I'm really hoping to have these out in early 2024. And it's going to be better than ever.